Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of A Slice of History with the Butterfly Princess. This week, I'm reading to you another article from the January 2025 edition of the BBC History magazine. Now, this week's article is all about the Battle of Mount Cassino during the Second World War. And this article has been written by James Holland, who was a military historian. So here is this week's article. Just bear with me a minute. So here goes. For the men of the US, for 34th Red Bulls Infantry Division, just getting up onto the Mount Cassino Massive was an achievement. To reach this rocky outcrop in late January 1944, those troops had crossed a 2-mile wide flooded valley, an area laced with enemy mines and overlooked by German troops in the mountains above. Let me just. The weather was cold, wet and miserable, and the Americans' route had taken them across a badly smashed causeway that offered an easy target for enemy artillery. These troops had then transferred the bed of the Rabigal River, which was impossible for tanks to cross, and clambered up into the hills and gullies that comprised the lower reaches of the towering missive. Finally, they had slipped and scrambled their way into the old ridges that crossed Mount Cassino. I'm just going to move this camera a bit because by 6th of February, the 2nd Battalion of the 135th Infantry, one of the 3 regiments of the Red Bulls, was within a stone's throw of Point 393, the rocky outcrop at the end of one of those long ridges dubbed Snake's Head Ridge by the Americans. The Germans launched a frenzied assault to displace them, only for the Red Bulls to counter-attack. Buoyant spit shooting from the hip, they moved from rock to rock, picking their way through the increasingly loose and stony terrain along the narrow ridge. Bullets were zipping and pinging all around marshes and grinders were exploding, and shrapnel and lethal shards of razor-sharp rock was fizzing through the air. There was a lot of screaming and cursing, recalled 23-year-old Sergeant Ralph Schnaps from Minnesota. We were not going to let the goddamn crowds push us off the hill. So close was the fighting that a rifle butt smashed in Scout's jaw, but somehow he survived. The Red Bulls prevailed through Point 593 itself, remaining carelessly in enemy hands. Scouts found an abandoned bottle of brandy which he swirled around his mouth. After spitting out some blood and fragments of teeth, he took a couple more swigs and started to feel better. The Americans were now looking down over the far side of the Mount Cassino Massive, directly onto the lower valley, more importantly on Highway 6. the ancient via Caspio remain road north. If they could reach it, the entire Grecian Gustav line, the system of defences constructed across Italy from the mouth of the river to the mouth of the Sandring and the southeast Persian would be unlocked to the route to Rome around 75 miles to the northwest as the crow flies, way wide open. Costly campaign. 1 minute. All of which raises the question, if things were going so well at this point, why did the battle result in such a waste of lives, with the Allies suffering at least 55,000 casualties? It can be partly explained by difficult terrain and awful weather conditions. Heavy rainfall fell almost continually through much of the previous winter. Yet, though this was clearly a terrible place and time to fight, there were some reasons to do so, and were it not the longer failures and leadership casualties might have been far fewer. The Allied invasion of mainland Italy in September 1943 had 4 key aims: to ensure that 1 minute, that Italy that Italy was knocked out of the war for good, to draw German troops away from the Eastern Front, and soon to be open Western fronts to capture Rome, and perhaps most importantly, to take control of the airfield complex around near the spur of it on Italy's heel, from where heavy bombers could further tighten the noose around Nazi Germany by bombing the Southern Reich. Three of these 4 aims had been achieved swiftly after the initial landings of southeast of Naples on the 9th of September. However, by early 1944, Rome still eluded the Allies. In addition, having captured in September 1943, they needed to ensure that it wasn't retaken by the Germans, who had made more divisions in Italy than the Allies did. Establishing a buffer of at least 50 miles north of Rome was therefore a priority. That is why, in early 1944, the Allies were desperately trying to break through mountain defences to clear a route to the capital. By the time the Red Bull approached Point 593, the German forces had already suffered a battering at the hands of a polyglot international force led by General Mark Clark, commander of the US Fifth Army. The faculty of the onslaught had so depleted the troops of the Germans' 44th Hutton Dispatch Division, which was defending the Mount Cassino missive, that its numbers were down to about 800 men from a full strength of 15,000. The high level of casualties explains why, although all things considered, and despite the preparations these troops had endured, the Americans had enjoyed a comparatively easy time getting up onto the missive. Though they'd mounted a highly active defence up to the point, almost every senior German commander in Italy now believed that the time had come to pull back. In the north of the country, mountains stretched almost continuously across the peninsula between Pisa and Rimini, forming a natural barrier. Defences were already being built along this new front, where supply lines were shorter and positions easier to maintain. With German forces in retreat on the Eastern Front and with an Allied assault intimate west of the Reich, it made sense to cut losses and withdraw to the defensive line far north of Rome. The Furies followed. Hitler, though, refused to cede ground, and his Super Mario in Italy, Field Marshal Albert Kursling was determined to do the Fury's bidding. The result was an appalling misuse of infantry division units were pulled apart, set hither and thither, filling holes and gaps and being butchered as a result. The replacements that arrived were largely older men and teenagers with little training. So worried was General Dick von Sugar that the German commander that he decided to risk the war of Kursling and Hitler made one more personal appeal to withdraw. This appeal, Van Snigger noted Tesla in his diary, was not approved by dodgingly defending the Gustav line. Kursling was committing his troops to even more sacrifice and for no tangible long-term benefit. Whatever the shortcomings of the overall German approach, the situation on Mount Cassino was being bolstered. Reinforcements were hurriedly sent forward, including the 90th Division and 1st Airborne Division sent to take command with General Ernest Scufford, a highly intelligent, experienced and skillful leader. Besides immortality, organised the defence of Mount Cassino far more effectively. He created 2 linked rings of defence rather like a figure of 8 with .593 where the 2 circuits met. This meant that should it be overrun, heavy fire could be directed on the attackers from each side, allowing the defenders to quickly retake it. Manning machine guns and motors effectively required some skill and training, but the key was to avoid giving up ground and to keep firing. The newly arrived through hilariously under strength were ideally placed to do this with enough experienced warriors to ensure that the under-trained teenage replacements could provide stout defence. Among those now defending Point 593 was Major Rudolf Kritzingen with his the 3rd Falcon Regiment, which reached Mount Cassino with just 236 troops rather than the 1,000 he should have been commanding. It was one of his men who walloped Ralph Scurples. Time and again, the rebels tried to take Point 593 and the parallel Phantom Ridge and Cold. Every time they were pushed back. Down in the valley, US commanders reckoned that one more push would do it, but they had no idea of Burger's defensive system and could not see these narrow ridgelines work and attack the attackers. Rather than attacking on a broad front and overwhelming the enemy, the Americans were forced to inch forward companies of 100 or few men across bare rock while being mown down by motors, grinders and machine guns. The Red Bulls were rapidly running out of steam, so General Sir Howard Alexander, the Allied Army Group Commander, created the New Zealand Corps commissioning men from the New Zealand 2nd Division, 4th Indian Division and British 78th Division, leading the new force was New Zealand Lieutenant General Sir Bernard Freyberg, VC, the most senior who had already been briefed, led a corps in Tunisia. He won his Victorian Cross on the Western Front during the First World War, but he was not no great intellect, and compounding that he'd been given no corps staff. As General Clark quickly discovered, Freyberg had been horribly over-promoted, yet the Fifth Army commander's hands were tied because of political sensitivities. The New Zealanders represented a British domination and were punching significantly above their weight. In the war, there was also morale problems. Some 6,000 Kiwi veterans of the North African campaign had been sent home on furlough, only to discover that large numbers of their counterparts had avoided the draft. Most of these experienced soldiers refused to return for the second stint until those exempted had done their first. News of this mutiny spread to New Zealanders in Italy, and Clark had been warned to tread carefully. Freyberg's shortcomings shouldn't have been an issue because commanding the French Indian Division was the extremely able Major General Francis Tucker, a soldier who could provide the strategic thinking that Freyberg lacked. Having arrived at the front ahead of Freyberg, Tucker soon realised the only rational option was to abandon the Mount Cassino missive and to instead attack further north. There the ground was higher but wider and less scored with gullies, fusions and narrow ridges. It was also significantly less well defended. Tucker additionally suggested mounting a crossing of the Rapido where the Texans had earlier attempted, but this time with properly planned fire support which the Texans had inexpectedly not used. Freyberg rapidly supported these suggestions, then disaster struck. Tucker was hit by a crippling bout of rheumatoid arthritis and had to be taken to hospital. Left without Tucker's strategic vision, the easily swayed Freyberg was influenced by the views of the US Two Corps Commander General Jeffrey Keyes and General Charles Scott Ryder, commanding the Royal Bulls, who both questioned Tucker's plans. Neither had been on the mountain and were unaware of the situation on the ground. Freyberg was persuaded to continue the assault on the Mount Cassino missive. When Tucker learned of this change of tack, he forced himself from his hospital bed to plead with Freyberg, but found the New Zealander deaf to his arguments. Tucker pointed out the problems of troops attacking along narrow ridges and suggested that the only way to break the German defences was with an overwhelming bombardment of the entire missive using high-capacity 2,000 and 4,000 pound bunker buster bombs, among other things that would have necessarily to destroy the Tall stone wall the Abbey perched at the end of the missive, which the Allies believe housed the German observational post. This 1,000 pound bomb Tucker told Freyberg in a follow-up note would be next to useless to effect this. Heavy four-engine bombers were needed, no fight bombers, and the bombing should be carefully coordinated with an immediate infantry attack to follow. The essence of the bombardment, Tucker added, should be its of obliterating weights, suddenness and duration of the bombing, but artillery bombardment and infantry attack early in the night under the artillery bombardment. Fatal misunderstanding. Tucker's intention had been to shock Freyberg into into re-adopting his original plan. Instead, the New Zealand headed to Clark's command post, where he demanded an air assault using single-pop kitty bombers and £1,000 to destroy the abbey. How Freiburg could have so badly misunderstood Tucker's suggestion could have so bad fathomed the latter followed up his personal visit, conducted in acute pain with written instructions so that there was no chance of mistaking his very significant plans. Clark was understandably opposed to destroying the abbey for what seemed to him to be no good reason. The way Freiburg presented it, there was no coordinated plan. 1 minute. There was no coordinated plan involving the infantry of the destruction of the German positions on the missive. Moreover, the historic site was originally founded in the 6th century. The Allies aimed to portray themselves as liberators, not cultural vandals. Clark appealed to Alexander, who backed Freiburg. Had Freiburg been American, it's clear Clark would have kicked this plan into the long grass. The bombing itself was catastrophic. The 4th Indian Division was delayed in getting onto the mountain because so many of the surviving Red Bulls had to be carried back down because different ammunitions had to be brought up. In addition, in Tucker's absence, his command had passed to Brigadier the division's artillery commander, who had neither the experience nor the strength of character to impose himself. Having finally ascended onto the missive, the 5th Indian Brigade discovered that despite being told otherwise, .593 was still in German hands and hatched plans to capture it. First, primarily assault on the night of the 15th of February. That morning, however, without any warning from Freiburg or anyone else, they learned that the bombers would arrive to unleash their loads at any moment. There was to be no coordination between air and ground forces. The static air forces had a wealthier window and a gap in action elsewhere. So flew over quickly, dropping a handful of £1,000, but mostly 500-pounders, far less powerful than the bombs that Tucker had insisted would be necessary. The abbey was destroyed, leaving a shattered wreck of tumbling debris and killing hundreds of civilians sheltering there. Though not, it seems, a single German, but when the 1st Royal Sussex tried to take .593 that night, they failed. So did a subsequent attack the following night, and with it the chance of swiftly clearing Mount Cassino. The Germans had held firm in their figure of 8 positions, with the 4th Indian Division supported by the Texans on their right flank, hiding the Allied half of the massive savage water. A subsequent German counterattack in Italy, Operation Fitzfang, launched on the 16th of February at Anzo on the coast between Cassino and Rome, was thwarted by the Allies. This only served to re-emphasise the challenge of launching a successful offensive in the atmospheric range during a savage winter. Alexander then thus decided to wait for better weather before the next pushing to bring both the 8th Army mainly on the flank of Italy and 5th Army side by side to hammer German supply lines with air power and then to strike along the Borg front once he had built up overwhelming strength. Alexander was well persuaded to make one more attempt on Mount Cassino and capturing the town below. Rain fell solitary for more than 3 weeks, so the attack was not launched until the 15th of March. Freiburg was still in place, a situation that, like much to his frustrations, was unable to change. Such were Allied politics. This time, Freiburg insisted on obliterating Cassino town with the same weight of bombs and shells Tucker suggested for the mountain above. The town was destroyed, but instead of sending in overwhelming numbers of tanks and infantry immediately after, as Clark had instructed, a couple of battalizations carefully inched into the town from one direction. Only overnight the Germans reinforced and the chance to sweep through the town was lost. What followed was a beautiful battle in the ruins. After this debate, the New Zealand Corps were finally resolved, and Freiburg posted away from the immediate firing line. With the arrival of spring, the ground hardened. Alexander was able to bring his two armies side by side, and with the advantage in materials he had always wanted on the night of 11th of May, he launched Operation Gegen. Mount Cassino fell on the 18th of May to the Polish Two Corps in what was the first battle. It was discovered that secret figure of the 8 defences. Once Mount Cassino was taken, the entrance to the vital Will Valley and the route to the capital was secured, and the Allies pushed rapidly north. Rome fell on the 4th of June. Gegen was a great Allied victory, an operation that showed that what could be achieved when skies were cleared and ground was dry, and commanders had time to plan and prepare properly. Yet it is the earlier setbacks, and especially the images of the shattered abbey and the utterly obliterated town below, that continue to defy the campaign in Italy, rather than the account of the victory 2 days before D-Day. The tragedy is that these gains on the campaign were so very avoidable. And that concludes this week's edition of an extra slice of a slice of history with the Butterfly Princess. Hope you can join me next week for another slice of history with the Butterfly Princess. Until then, I will see you very soon. Bye-bye for now.